Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Adventures Life, our panel on raising kids without sexual shame. I'm joined by my panelists, Fatime, Faye, Kobina, Ankomah, and Olu Timehin. I'm going to begin by asking them to introduce themselves, say how many kids in their household, their parents, and feel free to define household how you will. And a brief statement on your general parenting philosophy. So I'll pick on Kobe will be last because he's a man. Fatima, welcome to Kinna's World.
I'm very familiar with it.
Timehin will go first.
Okay, Kinna, I feel like you've introduced me on like 7 panels in my life and you still never get my name right.
Oh, really? Oh my God. Please correct me.
Like a white person. No, it's not like a white person.
Oh no.
Nothing like.
Feel free to call me out.
So it's Timehin.
Timehin. Good.
Yes. And now I have a little tiny household with one child in it who turns 8 in November.
We know. Lovely.
And she is extremely energetic and very strong-willed. And I think that when I first had her, my philosophy was, I want to raise a feminist child. I had no idea what I was signing myself up for when I set out to do that. And now my philosophy has sort of evolved from wanting to raise an explicitly feminist child to wanting to raise a child who is herself, which I think is very similar to wanting to raise a feminist child. But now I just imagine that beyond raising a feminist child, it is important to make room for the person that my child wants to be. Because, for instance, in thinking about wanting to raise a feminist child, I was like, should my child enjoy princesses and glitter this much, right? But she does. So now my philosophy is just allowing her to guide me, sort of support her to be the person that she wants to be. And it's really not an easy thing. It can be quite demanding even. And sometimes it has forced me to go back into my childhood to revisit traumas that I didn't even realize were traumas. So beyond parenting my daughter, my philosophy has forced me to revisit how I myself was parented. And that can be difficult, but I think that the journey is its own reward. In making room for whatever my child becomes, I'm allowing her and myself to become more of who we are, I think.
I'm sorry, it sounds like there's a sound issue. Nana's asking, is there a way for you to have you guys be louder? I'm on maximum volume on my end. I don't know about others.
Same.
Like I can hear you clearly.
Okay.
Can you hear me clearly?
Let me just ask. Nana, can you say now if you can hear clearly, and if you can chat it in the chat box?
Additional volume. Okay.
How do we do that?
Just raise your voice.
On my side, I don't know about. I think other people are also. Paula says that they can hear clearly.
Okay. Mine is the maximum.
Can you hear me?
Nana Dakwa said maybe I'm becoming deaf.
Maybe it's just you, love. I think it's just you. She says ignore her. We are ignoring you.
I'm sorry, Kinna, just because it looks like more people are joining. So just to pause briefly, To mention that there is interpretation on this for this chat. So if you want to hear in English, if you go to the bottom of your screen, there's a globe that says interpretation. So for English, to hear everything in English, please click English. If you want to hear everything in French, please click French. And so that will enable, if whoever is speaking, you'll still be able to hear in the language of your preference. So just a housekeeping note. Je vais le dire rapidement en français. Peut-être qu'il y a des personnes qui n'ont pas encore appuyé le bouton. Sur votre écran, en bas de votre écran, il y a une image, un globe et c'est écrit interprétation. Donc, si vous voulez écouter en français, cliquez où c'est écrit French ou français, je ne sais pas si c'est en français pour les autres personnes, mais c'est écrit French et ça vous permettra d'écouter tout ce qui est dit en français. Et bien sûr, si vous voulez écouter en anglais, cliquez sur English. Donc, nous avons l'assistance de 2 interprètes aujourd'hui qui vont nous permettre tous et toutes de pouvoir bien échanger dans les 2 langues. Merci. Okay, that's the only interview. I'm going on mute now. And if anyone has any problem, again, send a message on the chat. You can message me directly. I'm going to Sorry, please continue. I'm done on my side.
Okay. So we'll continue with Fatima.
Bonjour tout le monde, je m'appelle Fatime et j'habite dans un petit village de pêcheurs qui s'appelle Kinna. Et je suis une féministe. J'ai 2 enfants qui sont grands maintenant. J'ai une fille qui est maintenant mère et un garçon qui n'est pas encore marié mais qui est assez grand pour se marier. Et pour moi, éduquer les enfants pour qu'ils n'aient pas honte d'eux-mêmes, pas honte de qui ils sont, qu'ils n'aient pas honte de leur corps, c'est le rôle des parents. Très tôt, il faut qu'ils sachent comment parler de leur corps, quelles sont les barrières, enfin, quels sont les gestes barrières, comme maintenant qu'on parle de gestes barrières avec le COVID, quels sont les gestes barrières, quels sont les endroits où personne ne peut toucher, même les parents, parce que si vous, les parents, vous ne donnez pas l'exemple d'endroits à ne pas toucher, après les enfants, ils sont confus, ils pensent que n'importe quel adulte peut les toucher n'importe où. Voilà, en gros, pour me présenter.
Thank you very much, Fatima. Kobi?
Okay, so I am a lecturer and a student at the same time, and a writer. And my wife Shari and I have a soon-to-be 3-year-old boy right at the end of this month. And he's lovely. And our philosophy is to try and raise him to be himself, to be aware, and to be empathetic. And that's pretty much it.
Okay. You said something I'd like to pick up on, but I'll come back. This business about to be themselves is very interesting. Yeah, it's a very loaded thing, eh? So we'll come back to this being themselves when we discuss society. But the first thing, in general, I would like this to be a panel where we get specific and give what we are doing so that people leave this conversation with actual tips, practical tips. This is how I phrase this. This is how, so that we do not, or this is how I plan on. Tips are important in this conversation. So the first thing I want to ask is how how early an age do you start the conversation about bodies, about sexualities? How early an age? Who would like to go first? Yeah.
I think for my son, for Aris, it's pretty much been as soon as he could really start talking and understanding. So I think we've started very simply with body parts. So particularly when we're bathing him, we might talk to him about his body parts while we're bathing him. So it's a way, on the one hand, of getting him to learn his body parts, but then we don't shy away from calling his penis. But then we also go further than that and tell him no one is allowed to touch that. Like, we're bathing you, we're your parents, and that's it, no one else. And so we might name specific people who are not to do so, because these are the people who he engages with. And he's only just about to be 3. So that's pretty young.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Kobe. Ladies, who wants to go next? Timehin?
Moi, j'ai commencé aussi.
Fatima.
Je peux? Je peux? Hello?
Yes, you may.
Okay. J'ai commencé très tôt, aussi dès que mes enfants commençaient à parler, parce que je suis une personne qui n'était pas très présente physiquement chez moi. J'avais un travail qui prenait beaucoup, donc mes enfants étaient souvent ou bien confiés à ma mère, ou bien confiés à... Chez nous, on a des bonnes qui travaillent dans les maisons. Donc, très tôt, je leur ai appris les parties du corps et je leur ai expliqué qu'ils pouvaient me parler de tout. Il n'y avait pas de tabou. Mais malgré tout, j'ai une anecdote à raconter. Quand ma fille avait à peu près 5 ans, elle c'était un peu particulier parce que quand elle avait cet âge-là, j'étais déjà divorcée avec son père et elle allait tous les 2 week-ends passer le week-end chez son père. Donc, c'était une situation que je ne pouvais pas du tout contrôler. Et il fallait qu'elle parle. Donc, quand elle revenait, elle pouvait me raconter toutes sortes de choses. Je la laissais tout me raconter sans lui poser de questions, sans être trop curieuse, sans comment on dit, m'immiscer dans ce qui se passait là-bas. Mais tout ce qu'elle voulait me raconter, j'étais prête à écouter. Et un jour, je lui montre une photo dans une magazine d'un homme et d'une femme qui s'embrassent. Et je lui demande qu'est-ce qu'ils font. Et elle me dit, comme ça, un peu timide, je ne vais pas te dire, je ne vais pas te dire. Je dis, mais pourquoi tu ne veux pas me dire? Et elle me dit, ils sont en train de faire l'amour, mais dans un langage, dans la langue de chez nous, qui n'est utilisée que par les adultes. Alors là, j'étais tellement choquée que ma fille à 5 ans sache ça, mais je ne voulais pas comment on dit, je voulais qu'elle continue à me raconter des choses. Et donc, sur le coup, j'ai avalé ma salive de travers, j'ai toussé et je lui ai posé des questions de manière très naturelle. Comment tu sais ça et tout ça. Elle n'a jamais voulu me raconter exactement qui lui avait appris ces mots, mais je me suis dit, attention, il y a quelqu'un qui apprend à ma fille des choses du sexe. Et donc, à partir de ce moment-là, j'ai fait très attention d'être vraiment à l'écoute. Voilà. Donc, une anecdote pour dire qu'il ne faut pas dire 5 ans, c'est trop tôt. 5 ans, suivant les circonstances, suivant comment nous vivons en Afrique, 5 ans, ça peut ne pas être trop tôt.
Thank you. Timehin?
I think the other 2 panelists have touched on sort of what the importance of listening to your child, but also teaching your child who can or cannot touch their bodies. So I'm going to talk about teaching your child what she herself, or in my case, my daughter, what she herself can do with her body, because it's one thing to say, well, other people aren't allowed to touch you here, but then there's the question of, am I allowed to touch myself here? Because I think from when my daughter was quite little, she was very curious about her body and what it could do and what it couldn't do. And I think I had to have the conversation with myself when she was maybe 1.5 or 2 about how to respond to her touching her vulva or her clitoris, or like, because she was constantly doing that, like everywhere. She's just like, okay, I'm sitting down watching my cartoons and my hand is in my diaper. And I'm like, oh my God. What? It was very, I had to have that conversation with myself. Okay, so what is our household protocol around this? And I decided that the protocol was, you know, this is your body. You can do absolutely whatever you want with it, but there are certain things that are private. And even though I had to say it a few times to get myself to believe it, because I had grown up in a Christian household with all of these rules about pleasing yourself or pleasuring yourself, or even touching your genitalia in any way at all. And I had a lot of shame about discovering masturbation when I was about 7 or 8. So even though I knew intellectually that I wanted to protect my daughter from that unnecessary shame, it was still a bit of a journey for me to become comfortable with affirming her in that way. And eventually it's become a thing that I've had to reinforce to her, because we live in this society, so there are people from whom she will hear, oh, you're not supposed to do that, or that's wrong, or that's bad, and then she'll come back and ask me. I'm like, no, it's your body. So as important as it is to tell her that other people are not allowed certain things, I think it is crucial to tell her that she is completely in charge of what she does with her own body.
Mm-hmm. And thank you, because that's one of the things that I wanted to touch on. Basically, because we've become so aware and sensitized to predators and grooming, you know, when you bring up the issue of what are people telling their kids about their bodies, instinctively, like, you know, it's an imbalance towards who cannot touch you, because we as parents, you know, and as a world, we know what goes on, but also how to balance what you've said with, on the other hand, there is this pleasure thing. Fatima, can you continue how you do it about pleasure? On my part, and sometimes I'll join in because I'm the moderator. Because she also touched on society, I'm constantly having this masturbation question with my son. And one day he was like, ew. And I'm like, why? What? You're my son. What do you mean? He's like, oh, a teacher came to some presenter came to the school and they said masturbation is bad. And I was like, all the years of things I've been teaching you, it took one person to come and, what is that? You know, so Fatima, if you can talk about how we go about balancing the equation, so that we ourselves don't inadvertently tip too much to one side, as you know, as we must help them safeguard and ward off predators. Yeah.
Question difficile. Je ne sais pas si on peut trouver un équilibre. Je pense que le plus important, c'est vraiment d'être à l'écoute. Quand notre enfant, quand on arrive, des fois, il est arrivé qu'on entre sans trop y réfléchir dans la chambre de notre garçon ou de notre fille et de la trouver dans une situation où elle se touche, ou en tout cas, elle a un peu honte qu'on est trouvé dans ce genre de situation. Moi, ce que je fais, c'est que je dédramatise tout de suite. Donc, je dis, qu'est-ce que tu étais en train de faire? Est-ce que j'aurais dû taper? Donc, de telle sorte qu'elle comprenne qu'elle a aussi son intimité. Et que si par erreur ou sans trop réfléchir, je suis venue, ou en me disant, je veux dire, parce que des fois, on a des enfants, on ne se rend pas compte que nos enfants grandissent, on croit qu'ils sont toujours des enfants, alors qu'ils grandissent, alors qu'ils apprennent des choses, alors qu'ils ont des expériences. Donc, souvent, c'est de manière fortuite, au détour d'une conversation ou parce qu'on l'a surpris en train de regarder une revue pornographique ou un site, parce que maintenant, c'est devenu très fréquent. Les enfants très jeunes à l'école, ils se passent les sites. Et donc, à 12 ans, des fois, ils savent déjà où aller trouver des images pornographiques. Et dans ces cas-là, je dédramatise, je ne les... Comment on appelle ça? Bon, ça ne m'est jamais arrivé avec mes enfants, mais je sais que ma fille, ça lui est arrivé avec son garçon qui a maintenant 14 ans, je pense. Ça lui est arrivé. Et quand elle m'en a parlé, je lui ai dit, mais qu'est-ce que tu veux? C'est dans l'air du temps. Ce que tu dois faire, c'est parler et lui expliquer que ce n'est pas dramatique, mais l'amour, faire l'amour, aimer quelqu'un, ce n'est pas ce qu'on voit dans la porno. Donc, ce n'est pas des choses qu'il faut penser que tout le monde fait ça. Par exemple, moi, ta mère, je ne fais pas ceci ou je ne fais pas cela, je ne fais pas de bondage, je ne fais pas ci, je ne fais pas ça. Pas que je critique cette manière de faire, mais que tout le monde ne fait pas ce qui est montré dans les films pornographiques. Je pense que être à l'écoute, c'est la meilleure méthode, mais on sera toujours surpris, on sera toujours déboussolé par nos propres enfants.
Okay. Thank you. Kobe?
So if you could repeat the question.
My question is how are you or do you plan on talking to them about bodies and pleasure as opposed to bodies and on touching, and fear, which is something we should do?
Okay. I mean, we had a very similar experience with what Timehin was saying about touching. Aris started touching himself very early as well, and we had to think about how we respond to that, because I remember an instance where somebody goes up to him and the person was horrified, like, "Oh my God, why are you doing that?" And I had to calm the person down and then just explain to him that it's fine. But I think what we've done is to say it's fine, let's say inside, but when you're in public, other people may have a problem with it. So maybe don't, in as much as you can explain this to somebody who's 1.5, 2 years old. And so it's probably going to be an ongoing conversation. But then we also know that that was a phase, and it's a phase that many kids go through. And so he doesn't do that so much anymore. I think as much as possible is to try and to tell him not to be ashamed of his body, but then to just be aware of the existence of this outside world. And then the thing that Fatime said also about porn, when I think about the talk, people talk about the talk where you talk about the birds and the bees and all of that kind of stuff. I think the idea of a single talk where you sit down with a child and you explain the whole thing to them, it's dead. I think it's an ongoing conversation. So your approach needs to be that you are approachable enough, which is what Fatime has been saying. So I think for me, it's about telling him that that his body is okay, it's fine, that it's not public property, it's his. And also, I think porn will definitely come up at a point, and I think for me, it will be about telling him that that is not real. So if you want to learn about things that are real, there are places to go. I remember for myself, my mother was very free talking about sex with me. And so we grew up, or I grew up, being able to talk very freely about sex with her, very freely. And so I intend to do the same thing by my son.
Thank you, Kobe. Stay there. We'll start with you and go back to the ladies.
Okay.
What are you telling your children about your own sex life? Is opening up in some way to them about your own sex life a tool, an effective tool, a tool you can use? Because part of that is also about vulnerabilities. So yeah, please.
I think for Aris, it just hasn't come up yet. But the one time I think it came up was so he has this thing where he constantly wants to be on his mom's breast, and it's gone down a fair bit. But I remember one time she was lying down, she was really tired, and then he gets on top of her and he's trying to access her breast, and she's not allowing him to, and he gets really frustrated. And I think he shouts out, I was very surprised he was this articulate. He shouts out, "Release the breast." And so I remember that's the first time that I actually sat down with him and I'm like, Aris, have you ever seen me do that with your mom? Like, and I try and use myself to say that, like, okay, so this might be the way that you want to do things, and maybe this isn't the way. But I mean, I think he was barely 2 at the time. And so it was just about telling him that, like, maybe your mom owns her breasts and you don't own them. And so maybe you need to back off a little. And that's it. But I think it's too early. In that sense, it's too early. And like, it just hasn't come up yet.
Ladies, will one of you go?
Release the breast is legendary. Release the breast. Oh Lord. This question is really, I'm at
It's like the title of a book, isn't it? Oh, he will never live this down, Kobe.
That's a good thing.
But I'm at the stage with my daughter now where that I'm definitely there. It's not too early anymore. In fact, about 2 months ago, someone that I was in a relationship with about 4 or 5 years ago came to visit, and I hadn't seen him in, it had been a while. He was like, oh, you know, we're in a pandemic, what, let me just come and check on you. And after he left, because the evening that he came, I was not feeling well, so I was in my room. And so he came into my room to talk with me. And my daughter must have been playing or whatever. He was here for maybe half an hour and then he left. And then my daughter came into the room and she's like, your room smells weird. Did you and Mo have sex? I was like, excuse, young lady. I was taken so completely aback because throughout sort of lockdown and what, we've spent a lot of time talking about sex and periods and ovulation and getting breasts, because her body is also, I think she's going to enter puberty early, so her body is also changing a bit. So she has all of these questions and she's like, well, you know, I had a dream that I kissed this boy, and what does it mean, and how old will I be when I first have sex, and blah blah blah. So she's very intensely curious about all of these things, but I didn't realize that her curiosity would eventually target me so specifically. And I asked her why she had asked that. She was like, because your room smells different. I'm like, yes, because his perfume was quite strong. And so now, even though he's not in my room anymore, it still smells like him. She's like, yes, but did you? And I said, well, I don't know that that's any of your concern. And I wasn't sure how to, it took me a few minutes or a few seconds to arrive at that answer. But I thought to myself, I believe in openness, but I also believe that there must be sort of boundaries between what is hers and what is mine. And I don't know that I'm at the point yet where I'm comfortable discussing the specifics of my sex life in that way with her. When I was, until quite recently, I was in a long-term relationship, and she was aware that we had sex in a sort of like vague way, but we never explicitly talked about it. But she would be like, oh, so you guys like kissing or whatever. Can I join the kiss? Can I join the hug? But nothing as explicit as, are you having sex? And so now I realize that I'm at that stage with her. And my position, at least until she's a little bit older, is you can ask me whatever questions you want to ask, and I will answer them in sort of general ways that satisfy your curiosity, but I am not going to discuss the specifics of my personal sex life with you. Because I'm queer, she's aware of like sexualities beyond, a man and a woman sleeping together. And we've talked about, the logistics of sexual activity. She's like, so what's the difference between a vulva and a vagina? And I've had to explain that to her. And she's like, so what does it do? And how does that work? And how does pregnancy happen? So in general, I'm happy to answer these questions. But when it comes to like, did you and this specific person have sex 5 minutes ago? I'm not going to tell you that, even though we didn't, because I was just like, why? I haven't seen this person in 20 years. I know we're in a pandemic, but it's not that bad. Like, come on now. But still, it was very jarring. And it forced me to come to terms with the fact that my baby is not a baby anymore. In fact, we've decided that when she's 15, she will start exploring full-on sex. She's like, when I'm 15, I think I'm going to start having sex when I'm 15. I'm like, okay, cool. Enjoy your wait between now and then, but just stay out of my sex life in the meantime. In the meantime.
Thank you. Fatima, the question was, are you sharing your sex life with, did you share or with your children? Is that a tool that you find effective if you do so?
Alors, je suis très libre de parler de sexualité. Et malheureusement, le problème que j'ai, c'est que l'homme de ma vie, on va l'appeler comme ça, c'est un peu compliqué. Donc, l'homme de ma vie n'est pas aussi libre que moi de parler de sexualité. Alors, c'est souvent devant lui, quand on parle de sexualité, il montre une gêne. Et des fois même, il nous demande d'arrêter de parler de sexualité quand il est là. Donc, de parler de sexualité quand il n'est pas là. Et donc, moi, j'en ai profité parce que pour moi, c'était une manière de montrer à mes enfants que tout le monde n'aborde pas la sexualité de la même manière. Tout le monde n'a pas la même histoire de la sexualité. Moi, mes parents, ma mère était institutrice et mon père était médecin. Donc, chez nous, on parlait assez librement de sexualité. Mais mon homme, apparemment, dans sa vie, quand il a grandi, tout ça, en plus, c'était un enfant confié, il n'a pas eu l'occasion de parler librement de sexualité. Et donc, en faisant le parallèle entre qu'est-ce que moi je peux entendre et qu'est-ce que lui ne peut pas entendre, c'est ainsi que j'ai parlé de sexualité avec mes enfants, mais de manière très, très libre. Et des fois même de manière assez provocatrice parce que je voulais pousser mon homme dans ses derniers retranchements des fois. Je suis coupable.
And thank you. And Fatima, so we'll continue with you. Consent. How are you teaching consent? What tools do you use to teach consent? So that, what various tools are you using? And if you have, if you parent the two sex, is there a difference between how you would approach it with a boy or how you would approach it with a girl. Yeah? So Fatima, and then we'll move on.
Alors, pour le consentement, ça aussi c'était une question difficile parce que pour une fille, bon, je ne sais pas si je vais dire une bêtise, mais dans notre setting, dans notre environnement, pour que les filles soient abusées, c'est beaucoup plus facile que les garçons soient abusés. Parce qu'en général, les garçons sont toujours en groupe. Et les filles, on les garde à la maison. Je ne sais pas si vous voyez de quoi je parle. Les garçons sont des groupes de, je ne sais pas moi, 8, 5, ils sont en train de jouer au football dans la rue. C'est difficile d'aller les abuser quand les parents ne sont pas là. Mais une fille qu'on dit, ah, tu es une fille, tu ne peux pas aller jouer au football avec les enfants, reste à la maison, aide-moi à faire ci, aide-moi à faire ça. En 5 minutes, 10 minutes, tu ne fais pas attention et il peut se passer quelque chose. Donc, très tôt, j'ai commencé, disons, j'ai mis ma priorité sur ma fille, sur ce genre de choses. Même si j'ai aussi une autre anecdote à raconter sur mon garçon, mais peut-être si on a le temps plus tard. Et je lui disais que d'abord, parce que souvent aussi, c'est un jeu qu'on fait et entre les grands-parents et les petits-enfants. Je ne sais pas si ça se fait dans vos différents pays, mais on dit que le grand-père, c'est le mari de la petite fille. C'est son chéri. Vous avez entendu parler de ça? No?
There's a group in Ghana that does that actually. In northern Ghana. It's the grandchild, the granddaughter is the wife to the grandfather and vice versa, yeah. And it's, yeah.
Donc ça existe dans notre culture. Alors je me suis basée sur ces choses qui existent dans la culture pour dire, attention, si on dit que le grand-père ou le tonton ou je ne sais pas qui dit que tu es sa femme, ça ne veut pas dire qu'il peut avoir des rapports sexuels avec toi. Ça ne veut pas dire qu'il peut mettre quelque chose dans ta bouche que tu ne veux pas. Ça ne veut pas dire... Et je décrivais toutes ces choses que les gens font quand les enfants sont seuls en 2-3 minutes, ils prennent le doigt, ils mettent dans le vagin de la petite fille ou des choses comme ça. Donc je dis là et là et là et là, la bouche, les seins, l'anus, et je disais les mots qu'on utilise dans la langue et aussi en français. Parce qu'on parle beaucoup français en même temps que Wolof ici. Donc, je lui faisais la traduction des mots pour que quand quelqu'un la touche, par exemple, lui touche le vagin, qu'elle puisse dire, et je lui ai appris avec le ton et tout, je lui ai appris, on a fait comme un jeu de rôle, tonton ne touche pas à mon vagin, et à le dire très haut de sorte que la personne ait peur que quelqu'un d'autre l'entende. Et je dis, tu peux le faire avec n'importe qui. Que ce soit ton papa, que ce soit, et puis je citais tous les hommes de la famille, que ce soit ton frère, parce qu'il est arrivé que des enfants soient abusés par leur propre frère. C'est arrivé. Donc je citais tous les hommes et même les femmes de la famille et je disais telle personne, si tu touches à tel endroit, tu peux dire papa tel ou maman tel ou grand frère tel ne touche pas et tu cites l'endroit et tu mets le ton dessus. Et bon, j'aurais aimé que ma fille soit là pour me dire est-ce que ça a été efficace, mais en tout cas, on a fait beaucoup de jeux de rôle autour de ça pour qu'elle puisse comprendre qu'elle avait le droit quand ça lui plaisait pas et quand, je veux dire, quand c'était quelqu'un qui n'avait pas son âge, quand c'était, il y avait beaucoup de paramètres que je mettais. Et puis, elle me posait des questions. Donc, elle était aussi très bavarde. Elle pouvait parler. On pouvait parler de toutes sortes de choses. Tu vois? Des choses qu'elle voyait à la télé, des choses qu'on lui avait racontées. Et quand elle me parlait, des fois, j'étais absolument choquée, mais je faisais semblant de ne pas être choquée et j'essayais d'expliquer de manière raisonnable et comment on appelle ça, users-friendly, je ne sais pas comment dire ça en français, de sorte qu'elle sache qu'elle peut toujours venir avec toutes sortes de questions et qu'on pouvait en parler. Donc voilà, moi j'avais mis la priorité sur ma fille. J'espère que ça répond à votre question.
Thank you. Thank you. Sis? Or is it Kobe's turn on the question?
I mean, I'm happy to go, or...
I think it's Kobe. Is it Kobe?
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
sure. So I'm thinking back to my own childhood. I remember I had this older cousin, male cousin, who he would come by and babysit my younger brother and I once in a while. I must have been maybe 6 or 7. And my younger brother was 2 years younger than me. And there was one time that he brought his niece on his mother's side. We're related through our father. And so she was a bit older than us, maybe by 3 or 4 years. And I don't remember the first time she came by, what happened. But what I do remember, I can literally picture my younger brother and I on the stairs in our house where my cousin is coming by and we are aware that he's bringing that girl. And I remember our reaction being to hide. I remember her coming by and us not wanting her to be there. I remember her taking us up into the attic, forcing us to kiss parts of her body, that kind of thing. So I think with boys, sometimes boys fall between the cracks as well. And I think it's just really important to, again, that thing to do with like awkwardness and power, and basically just enabling your child to be able to speak to you about what has happened. I think what Fatime said about specifically describing the acts, like when this happens, you come to me. When this happens, you come to me. When this happens, you come to me, as opposed to just generally saying, if anybody does anything funny, you come to me, because what is funny, you know? So I think there's that. And then I think as boys get a little bit older, I remember all my friends who maybe lost virginity early. That's the ones who weren't lying through their teeth, as a lot of us are known to do. And they would talk about having lost their virginity to like their mother's friend and that kind of thing. And it makes me remember, I think there was an interview of the singer Chris Brown by the Guardian newspaper, I think it was, where they were speaking to him about kind of sex, and he was boasting about the fact that he lost his virginity. Or no, he didn't say he lost his virginity. He said the first time he had sex with somebody, he said something like, I was 9 or something like that. And in his mind, he had had sex with this person, and this was bragging rights, and he was boasting about it. And the interviewer said, wait, so how old was the person? And he said, and he was very proud of it. And the interview ends with Chris Brown storming out of the interview because the interviewer is telling him that he was raped. And he's like, what are you talking about? I was raped, blah, blah, blah. Because he like, in his mind, as a man, he was the person who was leading the thing, but he wasn't. It was statutory rape. And so I think there are ways in which these affect boys as well. And so I'm just really mindful for my son. And that's why I'm constantly like, you need to be able to talk to me. And I'm telling him about his body parts now. I'm trying to get him to a space where he feels as free with me as I felt with my mother.
Thank you. You all make points and I want to move off in a different direction, but hey, sis, why don't you continue and then I will move on then, because thank you very much for these submissions. Yeah, consent.
Yeah, so someone asked how old my daughter is. She's 8. Oh, she'll be 8 in November. And I'm at that stage with her now where the conversation about consent and who's allowed to do what to her body has moved from, well, no one should touch you here, to, in the sense of like adults or older people, to you and your friends when you're playing, or you and your cousins when you're playing shouldn't be doing certain things. And I have found that very tricky to navigate, because in my mind it's very clear, right, that nobody who's 13 or 14 should be touching you when you're 6 or 7. But if you're 6 or 7 and you're hanging out with another 6 or 7-year-old, and then all of this like show me yours and I'll show you mine starts to come up, that I have struggled very much with sending the message that you shouldn't be touching or looking at other people's genitals or asking them to take their clothes off, without tinging it with shame, right? Because I remember being 6 or 7 or 8 myself and being very keenly interested in other people's genitals and bodies. So I'm like, I don't know. I don't know. So I have tried with her to talk about, well, I understand that you're curious, but fundamentally, people's bodies don't look that much different from one another. People's genitals don't look that much different from one another. If you've seen one, you've kind of seen them all. So there's no need for you to go around asking your friends or letting your friends ask you to show you this, because there's not that much variety, right? And even if there is, you're not old enough to really appreciate variety. So can we just, but it's very tricky for me, because I think I started having the conversation about, well, no one should touch you like this with her when she was very little. But now that we've entered the space where she is curious, I find myself having to go back to what I really mean when I say this kind of touch is inappropriate, or this kind of interest in the body is inappropriate. And I find myself having to get very specific. So she has come to me and said, well, when I was at so-and-so person's house, we kissed, or she asked me to take off my panties, or I asked her to take off her panties. And I'm just like, oh my God. Because I can't pretend that these conversations are not stressful for me. They're extremely stressful. And there was a point during this pandemic when there was just so much stuff coming out. I was like, what? When did all of this happen? When did this happen? She was like, oh, last year. So I made a rule. I was like, okay, if there's anything you want to tell me, because usually she'll come into my room and she'll say, oh, mommy, I just remembered something. And I know that we're heading in that direction. And because I have all of these anxieties as her mother about, abuse or predators or whatever, and I don't want to react out of panic or fear. After about 2 or 3 incidents where she was like, oh yeah, so me and this person played this game, I said, you know what, every time you remember one of these things, just write it down in your little notebook. And then at the end of the week, we will go over all of the submissions that you have remembered, and we'll talk about them, because it was very stressful for me. I remember one time calling one of my really close friends in tears. It was a complete breakdown. I couldn't stop crying because I was just like, am I raising a predator? Like, what is happening? Why is it every 5 minutes like, oh yeah, so me and this person behind the school bus, and me and this, oh Lord. So I had to tell her, I'm very interested in these conversations, and I'm grateful that you feel comfortable sharing all of these things with me, but we must manage how I'm receiving this information so that I can respond appropriately. I actually said this to her, like, I don't want to make you feel bad about things that you shouldn't feel bad about. So to make sure that mommy is in a stable enough place emotionally to respond, just let's write these things down and then we'll revisit them at the end of the week at a set time, when I know that I've prepared myself for that conversation.
Thank you very much. You know, I've had an ongoing conversation I have with my son is about fear. I tell him that half of the time I am petrified. So sometimes when I react somewhere, he's like, Mommy, is that coming from your fear place or your freedom place? I'm like, it's from my fear place. Because I'm very honest, you're like, I try and deal with my fear as a parent. So when you say something, just stand there and give me a minute. Let me put space between the stimulus and the response, because it may come from my fear and I don't want to be a fearful parent. But I want to go back to you again, Timehin. Someone asked a really good question, and I think you are best placed to answer it. Has to do with how do you mitigate issues like slut shaming and shame from other people towards your child, because your child is so unburdened by shame. You see what I'm saying? Yeah.
That's a really good question. I think so my daughter is 8, but she's 7 actually, but she looks like she's the size of an 11 or 12-year-old, first of all. And on her father's side, they're quite voluptuous, and she has inherited all of that. From when she was like 2, it was clear that she would be a big and curvy, when she grows up, big and curvy girl or woman. And now that her body has started to change in preparation for puberty, I can see that this is going to be an issue. Even if I weren't raising her in the way I'm raising her, just because of the way she already looks and the way I know she will end up looking, it is something that I started thinking about very actively. And I have encountered it, not with regard to slut shaming yet, but with sort of playground etiquette, right? Other children, we live in this very family-friendly estate, and other children and their parents already have very strong reactions to my daughter's lack of inhibition. She's very outspoken, and she's not afraid or ashamed. So even with regard to she's happy to play with the boys or play with the girls. There's no, I can't do this. So already it's become a thing where I've had at least 2 moms come to my house and say, well, we saw your daughter playing with XYZ person. And she has come back once to say she was trying to talk to this person, some boy that she had decided was her BFF for the day. And then he was like, why don't you go and play with the girls? Why are you talking to me? And then the girls didn't want to play with her because it's like, you want to play with the boys anyway. And she has come to me and said, you know, like, I don't understand why are people being so mean to me? And the only answer that I have arrived at for now is that I know what our values are, and I know what the values that I try to teach her are. And I try to make sure that whatever response I am modeling for her is based on those values. So, for instance, I know that in a matter of years, it will become a thing where people are talking about her freedom with boys. And so she will come to me and say, well, you know, maybe this person doesn't want to be my friend anymore. This person has said this thing about me. And I will have to ask her, because I try to reflect things back to her so that she can arrive at answers for herself. I'm not going to be with you in class. I'm not going to be with you in the cafeteria or whatever. These people who are saying these things about you, are their opinions the sort of opinions you can respect? Are their opinions rooted in anything that is true? Is there any part of what they're saying that you can take responsibility for? Is there any part of what they're saying that you should take responsibility for? Do you need different friends? Do you need to change your approach to how you choose who to play with or who not to talk to? I don't know yet how this will play out exactly, but I've had a little bit of practice with all of this playground drama that's already happening. And I always try to reorient her to the things that I'm teaching her are true about herself and about the space that she can occupy in the world. And I know that for teenagers, it's completely different, because, you know, you want to belong and you want to be cool and you don't want people saying all of these things about you. So I'm not sure that this strategy will still be effective when she's older and trying to be part of a clique. But for now, she has a very strong sense of self. And every time it seems like she's sort of doubting things, and I ask her these questions. So did you do anything? Is this based in truth? Is this something you can respect? Is there anything you can take responsibility for? Does it matter, actually? And when she thinks about it, she's like, okay, I just met this boy. If he doesn't want to be my BFF, I'll find another person. So for now, it's working. I hope it continues to work when she's older and, you know, the desire to belong is stronger. Fingers crossed, because this is not going away anytime soon. Yeah.
No. Thank you very much. The next question is about, or questions, is about sexualities. And I want to know how you all are making room for the possibilities of your children's sexualities, and holding space for them to choose their sexualities in societies that are very extremely, horrifically homophobic and transphobic. I'll start with Fatime.
And, wow. Je ne sais pas si je peux aller assez loin pour expliquer notre situation actuelle au Sénégal, qui parle de l'homophobie, mais qui parle aussi de mon expérience personnelle avec mes enfants. C'est que quand j'étais gamine, ma grand-mère était la seule qui s'offusquait parce qu'il y avait un monsieur qui était ouvertement homosexuel, parce que nous, quand j'étais jeune, les gens étaient ouvertement homosexuels. Ils ne se cachaient pas de leur homosexualité. Et ils avaient un rôle dans la société. Ils étaient un peu comme des sortes de bouffons du roi. Ils aimaient faire la cuisine, ils aimaient s'habiller de manière extravagante, ils aimaient danser. Et donc, comme chez nous, les gens adorent les cérémonies familiales. Dans les cérémonies familiales, ils avaient un rôle de DJ. Enfin, ils étaient des entertainers. Je ne sais pas si c'est, comment dire ça en français, mais c'était un rôle que les gens acceptaient qu'ils fassent. Et eux aussi, ils aimaient le faire. Et ma grand-mère était la seule dans une assemblée de peut-être une cinquantaine ou une centaine de personnes qui disaient « Je refuse de manger ce qu'un homosexuel a préparé ». Mais ça, c'était il y a, je ne sais même plus combien d'années. Et maintenant, ce n'est plus le cas. Et pour parler de mon fils qui a beaucoup d'amitié masculine, mais très, très proche, par exemple, il a un ami, j'espère qu'il ne m'entend pas par contre. Là, c'est off records, parce que s'il m'entend, il va me tuer. Donc, j'espère qu'il ne m'entend pas, mais il a une amitié masculine très forte avec un de ses amis. Et moi, ils dorment ensemble dans le même lit, ils restent ensemble, ils sont seuls, je crois qu'ils fument, je ne sais pas exactement qu'est-ce qu'ils trafiquent. Et des fois, je lui pose, je dis, attends, est-ce que vous avez une relation intime? Est-ce que c'est ton petit copain? Mais genre sans le culpabiliser, sans aussi ne pas être, parce que c'est un adulte maintenant, c'est un homme. Sans le, comment dire, sans lui faire honte, même si c'est un homme, je veux dire, il a une certaine éducation, j'ai été très libre dans ma manière de parler de sexualité. Il savait dans mes amis qui étaient homosexuels et qui n'étaient pas homosexuels, parce que dans mes amis, j'avais des gens qui étaient homosexuels ouvertement. Mais quand ils étaient jeunes, je ne me rappelle pas que ce problème était un problème. Ce problème est devenu actuel. C'était pas un problème quand ils étaient jeunes, parce qu'on savait qui était ouvertement homosexuel. Et ces gens-là avaient assez d'hommes d'âge mûr avec qui ils pouvaient aller. Ce n'était pas, ils étaient dans des quartiers, il y avait des quartiers qui étaient presque réservés pour eux. Dans les quartiers, ils avaient des maisons, ils vivaient ensemble. Les gens qui les fréquentaient ne se cachaient presque pas pour venir les fréquenter. Donc, et je parle de l'homosexualité masculine. Hein. L'homosexualité féminine est plus couverte et plus discrète dans notre pays. Tu vois, en son temps en tout cas. Et maintenant aussi, je pense. Voilà, je ne sais pas si j'ai répondu à la question. Mais on a parlé de ces choses-là, on parlait de ces choses-là. Quand deux hommes qui étaient homosexuels venaient me voir, je pouvais dire oui, c'est son homme ou c'est son compagnon ou c'est sa compagne, c'est sa femme ou c'est son mari, de manière très ouverte.
Thank you. Kobe? I will.
Okay, this is something that I've actually thought about a fair bit. Like what would happen if years down the line, Aris comes up to me and explains to me that like he thinks he's gay or something along those lines. And I'm going to sound very pedantic, but again, it goes back to, on the one hand, making sure that he knows that he can come to me with that. And I can imagine myself being very fiercely protective of him. If he needs it, like just trying to make it work within a society that is very homophobic. So I've thought about it on that level. And then I guess another level is to also raise your child in environments where these things are not so strange to the child. So, so where your child asks you about this particular couple, you tell them about that particular couple, and you don't do so in a way that doesn't normalize it. And so it's important, I guess, for him growing up to just be aware that all of these various sexualities exist. I, as a lecturer, I learn a fair bit about history as well, particularly on this continent. And so it's the type of thing that comes up in conversation, that this is the way that things were over here. This might be the way that things were over there. There was this arrangement, there were these arrangements, et cetera, and then you have people's just their sexuality, that it's not something that they can fight, et cetera, like, and just being able to break it down. So I look forward to having that conversation with him over and over and over again, to a point where once he is able to figure himself out, then we know how we're moving. But I'm definitely thought to myself, what would it be like when, like, how would I react? And the idea is my reaction should be, awesome, congratulations, it's very cool that you are aware of this thing. So, like, what are you going to do with it? Like, you know, that kind of thing. So I think that's the extent to which I've thought about it. I need to make sure that this is normal enough for him to feel that he can come to me with it. And then we figure out like how he's going to live his life. If he needs me for advice, cool. If he needs me for protection, very cool, etc. Yeah.
Sis, Timehin?
I think I can approach this question from a different perspective because I myself am queer. And my daughter came out to me as straight last year. She was like, "Mommy, I have to tell you something." Unfortunately, I think she could tell that I would be kind of disappointed. But she didn't say unfortunately. She was like, "Mommy, I think I like boys." I was like, "Oh, really?" Girl, I guess if that's what you want for yourself. Are you sure we can't turn you? But in my case, I've had the sort of the opportunity to model what the variety of sexuality can look like, right? When my daughter was younger, I didn't quite realize that I was queer. So for the first few years of her life, I was in a long-term relationship with a man. And then after I came out as queer, you know, until I met somebody who I was serious about, there just wasn't, I guess, a need to introduce anybody that I was involved with. But then I met someone and it became serious, and she was at my house all the time. And then one day my daughter was like, you and Name are in love. I was like, at this point, she's like 4.5 or 5. I'm like, what? Where did you get that? She's like, well, you go on dates. I was like, what do you mean we go on dates? She said, yes, now, because you get dressed up in the evening and then you go out. So clearly you're going on dates and like you're always together. So you're in love. I was like, well, yeah, we are. So she's your girlfriend. I was like, yeah, she is. Cool. And it just, so I never came out to my daughter. She was just like that I can see. My eyes work. I see what y'all be doing. And so for her, it's very, it's a part of her life. I remember that there was one day, early this year or late last year, when my daughter came home from school and said, someone had asked what a lesbian is. And she was like, a lesbian is a woman that loves women. And I was like, in a Nigerian primary school, hey God, my child is going to get suspended. But the thing is, because she's so matter of fact about it, I don't even know that I'm going to have to teach her anything. I don't hide my sexuality or my lovers or my affection or my community is queer. My child is exposed to my community. So for her, life, in fact, I think she might be a little bit ashamed that she's straight, because maybe like a month ago she came and she was like, Mommy, do you think when I'm older I might like girls? I said, I don't know. Maybe, anyone you like is okay for you. But she understands that these are all the possibilities that exist. And there have been people who have come to me and said, oh, are you not confusing your child? And I really needed to be emphasized that children are not confused. We teach children what to understand about the world. We teach them what is real and what is legitimate and what is not. So there's nothing confusing about my child seeing her mother treated with tenderness. There's nothing confusing about her seeing me receive care. There's nothing confusing about her seeing me have a support system or somebody who looks at me with love. She's not, there's nothing confusing about it. And it is adults who are invested in the narrative that I can only receive care or love from a specific person who are confused, and then they project that onto my child. I'm like, it's not my fault that my 7-year-old is smarter than you. That sounds like a you problem, sir. Go sort that out. Amen. Amen.
Caroline or someone, could they tell me how much more time we have before Q&A? Because me, I can be asking questions all day long. I'm gonna ask a question. You didn't respond fast enough. So when we talk about, we tend, oh, there she is. Yeah.
What was the question? Sorry, I missed the question.
The question is, how much more time do I have to ask the panelists before we do Q&A?
That is completely up to you.
Oh, okay, then I'll ask one.
There are questions that have come in through the Q&A. There's some questions coming in through the chat.
Okay.
So whenever you are ready, we've got questions.
All right, so I will ask one or two and then I'll come to the Q&A. Thank you. So I did a podcast with Nana Dakwa. It was about sex and aging. And my son, my 14-year-old was sitting opposite me while I was talking. And one of the points I had made was that I had sex, I started having sex, I think when I was 13. I don't regret any of that, but no one told me about the other things that come along when you have sex. So we always think about sex like it's an activity by itself in its corner, but it's with people. That is, if you are not, enjoying yourself, you are going to do it with people. And I did not know anything about, emotional labor, emotional nonsense. I wasn't taught about that. So, and then there it was coming, and I was like, this just sucks. Because I didn't know. Nobody had trained me, nobody had talked to me. The conversation was always about sex, sexualities, So do you think about that quagmire? And do you think about the things that come along with the sex the relationships, and what do you teach your children? What do you teach, or what do you plan on teaching or talking to your children about these things? I will start with Kobi.
Things I plan on teaching Aris about the emotional part of things. I feel like I definitely do not have much to say here, because I think I spend a lot of my time as a lecturer advising young people on these kinds of things anyway. So I would like to hope that my relationship with my own son would not be that different. So I can give him the benefit of what I know, and his mother can give the benefit of what she knows. And we just make sure that there are people around him who can speak to those kinds of things, that he knows that we're available. But I think in terms of, because you mentioned, for example, emotional labor, I think that there are some specific things that I will have to sit him down and make him understand. Particularly within particularly within marriage and relationships and stuff like that. There are certain ways in which I, as a guy, I don't really think about these things by default based on the way in which I've been raised. And so it could be something like the simple act of having to think about what food is going to be made, not just this evening, but the next evening and the next evening and the next evening, and not just the evenings, but like all of that kind of thing. Or how to go to the market, how to cook, all of those kinds of things. So there's that aspect to it, which is very kind of logistical. And I feel like that's the place where I'm going to have to kind of speak up more. But as far as emotions and feelings and all of those kinds of things, I just want to avail myself and just be accessible. Yeah, so I don't imagine that there'd be a problem. If there is a problem, then something would have gone horribly wrong. Kinna,
Fatime? Yeah.
Alors, je me répète, je suis désolée, mais moi, je suis quelqu'un de très libre, qui parle très librement d'amour, de sexualité, tout ça, non seulement avec mes enfants, mais avec tous les enfants de la famille. J'ai des nièces, des neveux, et parce que j'ai la réputation d'être quelqu'un qui parle très librement de ces choses-là, les enfants se sont toujours approchés de moi et m'ont toujours posé des questions, souvent très embarrassantes, pour lesquelles je n'avais pas de réponse. Mais ce que j'ai vraiment voulu montrer, pas seulement à mes enfants, mais à tous les enfants autour de moi, parce que je suis quelqu'un qui est une sorte de multi-amoureuse, quelqu'un qui, je m'appelle une polyandre. Donc, il m'est arrivé d'avoir plusieurs partenaires plus ou moins officiels, donc je ne me cachais pas de mes enfants, donc mes enfants savaient que j'aimais et que j'avais des relations intimes avec des personnes qui étaient différentes. Et j'ai toujours parlé très librement de ça, parce que eux me posaient des questions. Et puis les enfants, ils sont pas fous. Non seulement ils sont pas fous, ils voient tout, mais en plus, je pense qu'ils captent des choses que même les adultes ne captent pas. Quand il y a des tensions dans l'air, les enfants, c'est comme les animaux. Ils captent ces tensions-là. Et ces tensions peuvent être des tensions d'amour, ou des tensions conflictuelles, ou des choses comme ça. Ils savent qu'il se passe quelque chose. Ils ne savent pas peut-être mettre les mots dessus, mais ils savent quand il se passe quelque chose entre deux personnes. Alors moi, j'ai toujours été très franche et très honnête pour leur dire, voilà, oui, c'est vrai, j'aime telle personne. Oui, mais tu aimes telle personne, mais aussi telle autre personne. Oui, c'est comme je t'aime toi et que j'aime ta sœur. En tout cas, leur montrer qu'il y avait des différences dans l'amour, l'amour filial, l'amour passionnel. Enfin, il y a cette sorte de différenciation de l'amour. Et moi, je suis quelqu'un qui aime profondément les hommes en général, les hommes, les femmes, l'humanité. Tu vois? Donc, pour moi, c'était très facile de leur oui, moi, j'aime les gens, j'aime telle personne, j'aime telle personne, je couche avec telle personne et je couche aussi avec telle personne et ça ne me pose pas de problème parce que ces personnes sont différentes, ce que je cherche chez ces personnes sont différentes, ce que ces personnes cherchent chez moi, c'est différent. Et donc, pour parler des sentiments, j'ai toujours parlé des sentiments. Et eux-mêmes me parlent de leurs sentiments quand ils sont confus, quand ils ne savent pas, quand ils aiment quelqu'un qui ne les aime pas, je veux dire de manière amoureuse. J'ai toujours parlé facilement avec eux de ça et pourquoi elle ne m'aime pas et pourquoi il me fait ci, et pourquoi il me fait ça. Alors, j'ai toujours parlé très librement et je conseille à tout le monde de parler très librement parce que même si vous ne dites rien, les enfants, ils regardent et ils savent et ils captent. Donc, il vaut mieux leur dire plutôt que quelqu'un d'autre vienne leur donner des informations fausses sur vous ou sur eux ou sur les autres personnes qui sont dans votre vie.
Thank you, sis. Timehin, how are you teaching things besides the very loaded sex issues?
Yeah. So for now, I understand that my daughter is the sort of person who really enjoys attention. And again, to go back to the way that she looks and her size and recently she asked me, well, mommy, what do you do when somebody looks at you like you're their girlfriend? And I'm just like, have we got here already? And because my sense is that she is straight, it is something that I'm already thinking about. You know, she's interested in sex. She's going to be a very sexually attractive woman who will girl who will most likely be having sex with boys. So now I'm like, okay, so what are the things that I have to actively discuss with her? And I have to actively discuss trusting her intuition, for instance. I think that at least for me, I wish that was something that I had been explicitly taught. You know, if you have a sense of whether someone is safe for you or not, trust that feeling. Because I don't know that we're teaching our children how to date, for instance, explicitly. And I want to teach my daughter how to date. It's like, okay, so if you're going to date someone, then you have to know why you're interested in the person. Like, what is the specific thing that you're attracted to in this person? What is the power dynamic in the situation with this person? What might it cost you to be intimate with this person? Because we live in a world that, you know, projects all of this onto girls who are sexually active. She's like, by the time I'm 15 and I'm having sex, I'm like, okay, so when you're 15, are you going to be having sex with 15-year-old boys? I would not recommend sex with 15-year-old boys. Just Nigerian boys. I wouldn't recommend that. But I also don't want you having sex with 17-year-old boys or 19-year-old boys. So let's talk about, you know, the power dynamics and how this person makes you feel. Do you feel safe around this person? Why do you feel the way you do around this person? Are you aware of what the non-sexual implications of having sex with this person might be? How it will affect your friendships with other girls, like what Uju was asking in her question? How it will affect your ability to go to school with this person if this is your little campus boyfriend? You know, all of these things are things that I really look forward to discussing with her, because I know that they will be issues for her. And then how to also navigate the inappropriate interests of older men, because we live in Nigeria and sexual capital is projected and forced onto girls that look the way my daughter looks. So how to hold her own or ask for help. And one thing that I'm really starting to be deliberate about is to deepen my friendships with people that I can trust with my child, because I understand that it's not everything that she will come to me for. So I want to make sure that that when she's going to other people, those people are people that will not lead her astray. So I'm taking responsibility now and making it a bit more explicit as well to my friends, that I'm going to be counting on you to answer questions that maybe she doesn't feel comfortable asking me, but you have to be, you, my friend, have to teach her the things that you wish you had been taught about navigating sexual intimacy and all of the all of the plenty drama that surrounds it.
My other question had to do with mitigating society, but I think you've all sort of answered some of that. Let's go to the Q&A. There are like 2 questions. Caroline, there's one in French.
Caroline to the rescue.
Who's going to read it? Caroline will read it.
Caroline to, yes. Okay, so I'll read it in French. This question, merci pour votre intervention. J'ai tellement peur en ce moment aussi pour ma fille. Elle a 10 ans et je cherche encore le moyen d'aborder la question de la sexualité et le consentement avec elle. J'ai aussi besoin d'établir la confiance entre elle et moi parce que nous n'avons jamais eu ces conversations. Après, c'est une personne très extravertie et j'ai l'impression qu'elle parle de ces choses avec ses amis. Une seule fois, elle m'a dit qu'elle avait un petit copain et après, plus rien. J'aurais voulu savoir ce qu'elle fait avec lui, mais elle comprenait ce que ça voulait dire. Mais je n'ai pas pu converser ce climat de confiance qu'elle voulait établir avec moi. Aujourd'hui, j'ai besoin de rétablir ce climat de confiance avec elle.
Thank you for the question. That's a big one. Panelists, who wants to answer? I mean, I could answer, but
I can go.
Good.
Doctors are close in age. So I think the key to gaining her trust is to not make it about sex specifically. Because her interest in sex or boys is connected to her interest in everything else. And if you try to establish trust on the basis of conversations about sex, she's not going to trust you because sex is such a loaded subject already. And if you haven't had those conversations before and you want to dive right into that now, it's not, she won't be able to trust it. So I think if you take Fatima's approach and listen to her about everything, have conversations with her about everything, and build trust in relation to everything. So if she's talking about playground drama or something that happened with her best friend, let her talk, ask her questions so she shares more, and then take that approach and apply it over time after you have built trust to sex. Because the thing is, I know that there is, you might feel a sense of urgency that you want to have that conversation with her now, but I can assure you that if you go straight to that, it's not going to happen. So you do need to take the time to build that trust and hope that whatever it is that's happening while you're building the trust, she will soon be able to tell you everything. But you can't, I mean, you can ask her, she's not going to answer you. So you can ask her, yes, what's happening with your boyfriend? And she may not tell you the truth because there hasn't been space in your relationship until now for that sort of conversation. So ask her about everything else and then slowly work your way up to that. Because the point is not for her to trust you with information about her boyfriend. The point is for her to trust you. That is.
Yeah. Kinna, if I could comment on that, just a small point I think to me made that I think is worth kind of reiterating, which is the impression that I got from the question is that this is someone who perhaps hasn't already done the work of establishing the trust. And so I guess it would then be a case of, how do I now go about doing that? I now realize that this is something that maybe I should have been doing the whole time, but then how do I now go about doing that? And I think the first step to keep in mind is acknowledge the fact that perhaps this was an area that you should have been looking at earlier. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It just means that it should temper your expectations of the extent to which your child will trust you now. And so perhaps don't be initially hurt, because there are lots of parents who they suddenly just flip it on the child. It's kind of like they've not kind of invested that time. And then all of a sudden they're just like, okay, so now we want to be having these conversations, and then the child is looking at you like, not a chance in hell. And so it's about acknowledging that, maybe even acknowledging that with the child as a way of communicating to them that you respect them, like just start building the foundations and just be incredibly patient. But try as much as you can to just acknowledge and then build from there.
I think it's also important, parents should forgive themselves, not to operate with guilt, not to feel fear. Yeah. I frequently find myself telling my 14-year-old right now, I'm always talking about, oh, you know what, I'm petrified right now. I just want to tell you that I am scared right now. Or this didn't happen for me in my childhood, and so I want to build it with you. I may not know how, but because, I'm just a mother. What am I? I'm just a human being, but maybe together we can do it. I think it's important to move away while you have the fear. It's important to move away from the fear. Put some distance between you and the fear. Doesn't mean we don't still have it, and it's never late, by the way. As you should just work on this on yourself and provide that space. And however long it takes, one day they'll walk into that space and they'll be there with you. But do not beat yourself up about it. Acknowledge it, give yourself grace, and just deal with the fear. Every day we want to conquer that fear, and do not operate from leave your fear, let your fears about what happened to you in your childhood, leave that fear there, but take the lesson. Take those lessons and bring it forward, but don't feel guilty. Guilt is just awful. Yes, the next question, I'll read it out. Some sex ed content in a few countries introduce sexuality and gender in the curriculum, but a few parents are against this content because it might encourage engagement in sexual behavior as early as 8 to 10 years old. How would you balance encouraging your child to explore their sexuality and engage in sexual behaviors in a bid to probably figure out what they enjoy? My sense is that we may have answered this question in the conversation, but does anyone want to address that? Yeah.
Kinna, I suspect that you should address this, but I'll say this.
A reason, no, I don't talk.
Okay, I think okay, so I'm in Ghana, and I know that this became a hot button issue. Was it earlier this year or last year? Mm-hmm. A few times over. And I just remember thinking to myself, okay, the state can do whatever the F it wants. I know what I'm going to do for my child. And so for me, I'm not, it's like, it's a shame. And where we can advocate for change, let's do that. But I can't allow people's fears to regulate the way in which I'm raising my child. And so I am going to equip my child as much as possible. So then specifically on how to encourage my child to explore their sexuality and engage in sexual behavior, I think it's almost, I mean, it's linked, but it's separate, because if you are teaching your child about sexuality and gender away from the curriculum, then you deal with things as and when they come. Yeah, and I think you can't, honestly, you can't do more than that. Mm-hmm. But I'm going to rely on the state, basically, for that, especially not this state. God. Mm-hmm.
When that whole thing happened in Ghana, I mean, my son came home one day and said, all this noise about this sex ed, Ghanaians are whack. And I was like, okay, that's the he just said Ghanaians are whack, and that's all I have to say about that. And I was like, okay, I don't have to do any more work in this area. We are done here, so move on. He's like, well, they're just whack. Can you imagine what they're saying, mommy? So that was it. So yeah, but one day he came home and he's like, what's a clitoris? And I was like, it's a female pleasure organ. Where haven't we? He's like, oh, we did it in school. I was like, okay. So it's interesting that the existing curriculum had stuff like that in there, but then there was this whole brouhaha about the new curriculum because the press had highlighted certain sections talking about sexuality. So otherwise, Ghanaian parents in general do not even know what was in the existing sex ed content to even like object, you know, because they would have objected that at the time, I think he was like 11. An 11-year-old boy is asking his mother, what's a clitoris? They would have had a fit, but they are so unengaged, you know. And with the new sex ed, it was framed as, what was it framed as? It was framed as advancing the gay agenda, remember? So of course, that they had a lot to talk about, the hypocrites, you know. So anyway, that was the a question, but we have addressed it. It was about the real harm that can be caused by assumptions or reputations for promiscuity simply because your child appears to be unburdened. We've addressed that. Is there, Caroline, how much more time?
Right now, so we programmed up to 7, so another 27 minutes. So, but if it looks like there are some questions or comments that are
now more questions are coming in.
Yeah. And there's
someone.
Yeah, so we have those, and then I have some other ones that have come in earlier. So we can talk, maybe address the ones that are coming up in the Q&A.
Okay. Here's a good one, the latest one. In trying to teach children about sexuality, if they keep trying to circumvent the topic, how do we approach that? So, you know, you are all ready to have the talk and they're like, hey, mommy, I'm going to my room now. Don't embarrass me, you know, things like that. What do you do?
That just means that they're not ready. I think it's important to let the child lead because they know what they need.
Yeah.
If they're interested in the subject, they'll listen. And if they're not listening, it's because they're not interested. So you also don't want to, you know, stress them with your wokeness. Yes. Be like, we need to no. If I just want to watch Paw Patrol, let me watch my Paw Patrol.
Yeah. My son has said that I have ruined all the shows. He doesn't like to introduce me to any show because there I will be coming with my race, my anti-blackness talk, and that, you know what they said here is homophobic. And so I just wait for him to drop something. And then I just move in, or I call him and if I say we're going to have a talk, he's like, look, what are you going to spoil for me today? So a lot of it is you have to, I think people need to be aware that you are living with a growing mind. And that growing mind has boundaries of its own. And so you just really need to be attentive to the spaces that you can move into. When something comes up, you're like, very casually, well, what's going on there? Tell me more. Don't come in all parental and be like, you know, let me sit you down and tell you the what is what. No. So those kinds of things, yeah. When my son was like 4 years old, we were sitting in the living room, and then he would come in front of me and blurt out the fancy word for dick, which is kote. And then he would come and look in my face and go, kote. And then he would run around. So I knew he wanted me to be outraged. There I was, I'm like, Kobe, what word are you saying? And it was so like, and that's how we got over that word. I just performed like I'm so outraged, and he was like, yeah, I've freaked mommy out. And that was the end of that. I mean, that was just it. So yeah. Another question. My son is 5 and he's very intrigued with women's bodies and explains his wee feels hard sometimes. I have stopped bathing him and tried to monitor music videos he watches online. Help. Oh. Ah. Yeah. Who's gonna take this one?
Je suis désolée. Ce problème, c'est le problème de tout le monde aujourd'hui. On l'a dit plus haut, tout tourne autour de la sexualité, comment on appelle ça? La publicité, même, je suis désolée, mais même les dessins vidéo, des dessins animés des enfants, il y a des éléments sexuels là-dessus. Si on les regarde, il y a comment on appelle, des allusions très claires sur la sexualité. Nos enfants sont exposés très vite à la sexualité et ils sont curieux. Alors, moi, je pense qu'il faut juste, comment on dit chez nous, attacher son cœur. Tu attaches ton cœur bien fort pour qu'il ne sorte pas de ta poitrine et tu es prête à écouter toutes les questions qu'ils vont te poser. Et quand tu ne sais pas répondre à une question, il faut honnêtement dire « je ne sais pas répondre à cette question ». Les enfants savent. Si on est mal à l'aise quand tu nous poses une question, ils savent qu'on est mal à l'aise. Pourquoi ne pas leur dire « écoute, je suis désolée, c'est légitime que tu me poses cette question, mais je suis mal à l'aise. Je ne sais pas quoi te répondre. » Et une anecdote, j'aime bien raconter les anecdotes. J'étais un jour dans un carapide, c'est des petits transports en commun, des petits minibus, avec ma fille pour aller voir sa tante qui a accouché. Et elle avait, je pense, à peu près 6-7 ans. Et tout à coup, dans le bus avec tout le monde, elle m'a demandé « mais maman, les enfants par où ils passent pour sortir ?» Et je ne vous raconte pas l'histoire, dans le bus, tout le monde a fait « et moi, j'ai dit, ben, tu sais, moi, je ne sais pas, parce que je ne savais pas comment répondre devant ce public. » Elle m'avait inventé un public et elle m'a dit « mais si, tu sais, puisque tu as eu un enfant. » Et j'ai dit « écoute, moi, ça fait tellement longtemps, quand j'ai eu un enfant, ça fait 7 ans. Ta tante qui vient d'accoucher, on va aller et tu vas lui poser la question. » Et ça a créé comment on appelle, un rire général dans le bus. Mais voilà, je pense qu'il faut dédramatiser, il faut jouer, il faut pas qu'ils aient honte. Il ne faut pas qu'ils aient honte de poser des questions. Il ne faut pas qu'ils aient honte que vous ne sachiez pas répondre ou que vous soyez embarrassés. Je pense être nous-mêmes aussi, c'est aider nos enfants à être eux-mêmes. Si nous, on est trop coincés, comment on va faire des enfants qui ne sont pas coincés? Je vous le demande.
Yeah, thank you. Anyone else? I think Fatime has covered it, but it is, you know, to the person who posted, flip it. Tell yourself that it's a privilege that your son, your son gets to tell you these things, and gives you an opportunity to address it, and do not operate out of your fear. Watch, you know, I go into my son's room and he'll be on YouTube and I'm like, well, what you watching? Lately he's gotten into some videos that are of people eating mukbangs. I mean, it's completely totally useless content. There's a guy who does this with ASMR. Like this Korean guy, he's very handsome, by the way. And of course, this only works because he's slim and handsome. He eats these things. But you know, I sit in his room and I engage with it, right? I don't pass judgment like, why are you wasting data on this thing? You know, it's important. You should look at it like you get to have this relationship with your child. They at 5 years, they are expressing something to you. You get to lead them without shame. Put the fear aside, because women's bodies are intriguing. I mean, I'm intrigued by women's bodies, are we not? So he's expressing something that is very natural. And of course, sure, the content these days are sexualized, but this is the challenge that we rise up to as parents. You do not want to. The comment said I'm assuming it's the mother had stopped bathing him. No, you do not want to remove special relationships and intimacies with your child out of your fear. Because if you do that, kids pick up on signals very, very quickly. He's going to now assume that there's something, God forbid, that there's something dirty or unwanted about him that his mother or parent won't bath him anymore. And that's a much bigger issue than this issue he's going through with being intrigued by women's bodies. So we want to really check how we respond to our children. If it helps, journal it. Just tell yourself right now, at this moment, I'm feeling some fear. And here is where it's coming from. And then do what you have to do. Because it is a privilege that you get to be in his life at this time, to help him and to help him become a healthy adult. And that is your role. So don't run away from it. I know it's difficult, but that's where we are. I didn't mean to be preachy. It's my panel.
If Kinna, can I add to that?
Yes.
Just with my lecturer hat on, I sit in classes all the time, and students, not kids obviously, but like students ask me things that I don't know. And so I tell them that I don't know. But then I do tell them that I'll try and find out something along those lines. So then, I mean, Google is your friend. Go and look it up. Look specifically, how do I respond to this particular thing? And then you sift through and you decide what makes sense to you. Always have to get caught up in the moment. You can always hit pause and basically be like, you know what, I'll get back to you. I don't know. And I think that's also an important lesson for children to learn, that like their parents don't know everything. It prevents them later from the disappointment of finding that out.
I had a nephew who lived with me. He was around 13, and one day he came out. We were just watching something, and some sexualized content came on, and he was like, "Ooh, women's breasts are beautiful, are they not?" And I'm like, "Hell yeah, they are gorgeous," and it is true. And we move on. I'm like, yes, it is. And I talked about how my breasts have fallen, and he's like, "Mommy, that's just too much information. I don't want to hear." I was like, "Okay." I said, when I lose weight, I'm going to have a breast surgery. He laughed, and then we moved on. Because it is a fact. You do not want them to hide these things from you. And in the moment while I'm being all like, oh, they are like, oh, mommy is cool, I am dying inside. I'm dying. So, have all these tactics. Like sometimes I ask Graham, Kobe is a DJ. I ask Graham about the hippest rappers, because this, I want to find ways in which I can, I tend to drop a name like XXX Tentacion. All my son's friends are like, I'm cool. But this is so that I can have conversations with them. It's like, I use all the tools because, so I think it's important to not die. You can die inside or outside. Do not let them see, and don't react like that. So, There's a question that has come in to Timehin. Navigating queer parenting in Africa, homophobic parts is something I think about a lot. How do you navigate the public side of things, going out to restaurants, family type activities, PDA or lack thereof?
Okay, I've just seen there are two things. Thank you. Stacy said something really nice. Thank you. I'm doing my best. To this question, so I have to be very frank that being middle class offers some protection from overt homophobia in Nigeria. And I imagine that it's similar in Accra or in Ghana. So for me, it's not, my anxiety has mostly been about managing the hostility that my daughter specifically experiences, right? Because I'm an adult, whatever. My daughter is very enthusiastic about everything. So I remember my first serious relationship with a woman, my daughter, we would be walking, taking a stroll in the evening, and we would run into the neighbors, and my daughter would be like, oh, this is my mom, and this is my mom's girlfriend, to everybody and anybody. And sometimes I would allow her, and people would have all kinds of reactions. They'd be like, oh, okay, that's. And then sometimes I would then have a conversation with my daughter and ask her, well, why did you feel the need to tell this person that, we don't just announce everything about mommy's life to everyone. So I tried, with that particular thing, I tried not to make it about my sexuality and tried to make it more about what is private versus what is public. And then eventually I had to have a conversation with her when she was a bit older about how some people believe that there is something fundamentally wrong with same-sex relationships. And so just to manage other people's drama, because people believe all kinds of things. They believe, I don't know, people believe absurd things. So it's not about what people believe, it's about managing or minimizing the amount of stress that you have to experience because of other people's beliefs. But other than that, we go on dates together. We've traveled locally and internationally together. In fact, I remember there was one time we were going on holiday, and then we were at immigration, and all of us handed over our passports together. And then the man is like, "Are you all traveling together?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And he says, "As what?" I was like, "Oh, she's my friend." And then my daughter said, "Your friend?" And I was like, this is not the time, my love. So then we got out of the place, and she's like, Mommy, why did you tell that man that she's your friend? You said it's not good to lie. I was like, look. Let us just manage our wahala in this country, because that's how we'll go where we're going. We're not allowed to come back inside. So please. But I make it very clear that it's not about us and it's not about our sexuality. It's about other people's limiting beliefs and making sure that we don't have to experience the consequences of other people's nonsense. I hope that I have, but also I must be honest that being middle class minimizes the amount of drama that we would have to experience anyway.
Yeah. Do you guys have questions for each other? Or for me? You have questions?
Oui, j'ai une question. C'est pour la nudité. Comment vous gérez la nudité devant vos enfants? Non seulement votre nudité à vous, mais leur propre nudité, parce que certains enfants sont plus pudiques que d'autres. Certains enfants, je parle de garçons ou de filles. Alors, j'aimerais savoir comment vous gérez ça.
Yeah, you, the other two panelists answer before.
Kinna. Okay. I mean, for me, it's not so much. I defer to Timehin because it's not so much of an issue for me at the moment. He's so young that it's just really not become an issue. So I can't speak.
Fair point.
I could, yeah. So I'm naked around my daughter all the time and vice versa. And now that her body has started to change, it has become a whole thing where she's just like, so am I going to get breasts? Are they going to look like yours? Are they going to look like Auntie Alice's? Are they going to be big? Are they going to be small? And now she's like, also comparing her body to her cousin's body. Her cousin is younger and her body hasn't started changing. And so I think at first I thought that there would come a time when I would become a bit more reticent about being naked around her. But now that I've seen how my being naked around her allows her to ask questions that she probably wouldn't be able to ask otherwise, because the questions wouldn't even come up, because it's in looking at my body that she then notices things about her body. So now I'm a bit like, as long as she's comfortable with it, I'm comfortable with it. I don't walk around my entire house naked. I'm naked in my room, and she comes into my room and I'm naked. I'm not going to be like, go outside, let me put on a robe or whatever. And if there ever comes a time when she doesn't want me to see her naked anymore, then I will also respect that. I think the fundamental principle of respecting the reciprocity of the relationship and respecting my child, and requiring also that she respect me, because I'm also very clear on like boundaries and what is hers and what is mine, and how we love each other and we are in each other's lives, and I'm her mother and she's my daughter, but we are two distinct human beings. And so if there's anything that makes either of us uncomfortable, then the other person will have to figure out how they navigate that. So for instance, my daughter has released the breast. Hey. My daughter was obsessed with breasts for a long time. In fact, like, maybe that's why she even had to come out as straight, because she was like, I know I like boobs, but it's only like in an academic way. And I had to tell her repeatedly, look, I'm not comfortable with you. You're now 6 years old, 7 years old. Leave my boobs alone. They're mine. Okay? And so, again, being naked around her allows me the opportunity to talk about boundaries and consent and bodily autonomy in ways that perhaps wouldn't be possible otherwise. So I'm very down with nudity.
Just Kinna, just jumping on that. I'm listening to that kind of and learning, and I'm wondering to myself, like a couple of years down the line, how I will feel about that as a father and a son, because I imagine that I don't know why, I could be wrong, but I imagine that it's easier for a mother and a daughter than it is for a father and a son to be naked around each other. I don't know. Yeah, and so I'm really wondering how I will respond to that, how I will react to that. I think my default would be to, for example, he walks into the room when I'm naked. It shouldn't be to cover my nipples in shame, or like, but it would be more to do with but maybe not acting shocked, and just, I don't know, giving him a look like yes, and and I don't know, like I'm questioning my own hang-ups in listening to me and saying, and I'm wondering, in defining the line between kind of what I'm comfortable with and what I'm not comfortable with, how much of that would be an expression of my own hang-ups, and is that a good thing, is that a bad thing? I think at the end of the day, I'll just allow myself grace, but it's something that came up to me when you were speaking. It's something that will stay with me after this conversation.
Well, I no longer intentionally, when the kids are young, you go, you are taking care of them, you are naked, you are whatever. I don't do that anymore with my boys. But if they see me naked, they are not going to fall out, be like, oh my God. No, that was not going to happen. I was formerly a diabetic, and there was a time when I had really bad neuropathy pain in my right shoulder, such that I couldn't put on my bra. Even just like doing it I was in so much pain. I'd wake up and think somebody should just saw off this arm. So a lot of the times, in fact, for like a 2-month period, I have to call one of them in to put on my bra for me, because who else was going to do it? And they would do it, and they didn't freak out about it. I've lost some weight. So the other day I was like, oh, you guys should know. I said, it turns out my fat stomach was supporting my boobs. And my boobs have gone flatter. They just look at me like, oh, these chronicles that you tell us. They were like, what? But I felt I had to tell somebody, and they were the ones who were around. I'm like, this is what has happened to me. So, you know, this is what is happening. They're like, whatever, mommy, you know. But then also we go to the village a lot, you see. And while instances of people being nude in villages, at least in fancy villages, has decreased. It's not, you know, older women will come out with a cloth at their waist. I have an aunt who still does that. And she'll sit on her courtyard with her boobs out, and the kids will be taking food from her. You know, she'll be living her life. So I've also tried to let them know that this thing about shame associated with nudity is not African. So, and it is not our own lived experience as a family that prior to COVID, we'll be going to the village like every other month. So just don't freak out about it. It happens, and hey, you know, and you see that bodies change, and you know, and they're like, yeah, we know, you know, and then we move on. So I think it's important because to let children be relaxed about it. You know, there's a lot of shame around parents doing these sorts of things. But I mean, you are a family. These things are bound to happen. And there shouldn't be shame. So yeah. Do my panelists have any other questions? That was a great question.
There's
any
question
other?
coming through the Q&A. One last question. That's coming through the Q&A.
What is it? What are some of the errors you think your parents made in teaching you about sexuality that you strive to not replicate? Great question. What are some of the errors that you...
I would say the fact that I wasn't taught anything at all. There was just nothing. It was just a big empty space, which looking back now protected me in some ways, because I think that if my parents had explicitly taught me about sexuality, I would have been taught about, you know, heterosexual sexuality, which would have added to all the stuff that I would have had to unpack around my own sexuality. So in a way, it was a blessing in disguise, but there was nothing. To be fair, I also wasn't taught shame explicitly by my parents, but because the shame that I was being taught by the rest of the world wasn't being countered by my parents either, I picked up some sexual shame regardless. But it was just nothing. It was just like big empty space.
Okay, I have to interject. We have 2 minutes. Oh, 2 hours have gone by, my people. So I will allow each of you a short closing thing if you want to give it. You can respond to this question as your closing comments. So, Kobi?
Just hopping off the back of what Timehin said, I think as parents, we have a responsibility to at least try to prepare our kids for the world, and so to give them the tools that they need to navigate and to understand what is going on to the best of our understanding, and so we should do that, and just try as much as we can to make sure that the ways in which we feel that we have suffered on account of the lack of that are not replicated. And so, yeah.
Fatime?
Ça va. Je ne vois pas sérieux. Je pense que je fais partie de ces privilégiés. Mon père était très, très libre. Ma mère était plus conventionnelle, donc c'était elle qui nous remettait dans le droit chemin. Quand mon père, il était très ouvert, il nous a exposés à toutes sortes de choses, à toutes sortes de personnes qui venaient de partout. Donc, je ne pense pas qu'ils aient fait une quelconque erreur, en tout cas en ce qui concerne la sexualité ou des choses comme ça. Et j'aimerais vous parler d'un programme, je ne sais pas si Fatima est là, parce qu'on a parlé avec Princesse, qui est au Nigeria et qui fait un très, très beau travail sur l'éducation par rapport au corps pour qu'on n'ait pas peur enfin, qu'on n'ait pas honte. Et elle a une belle chanson que j'espère que Fatima enverra à vous tous qui êtes venus pour parler de ce sujet. Et ça s'appelle Media Concern. Media Concern, et c'est au Nigeria. Elle est là, Fatima, ou pas? Elle est dans le public?
Je pense qu'elle est, mais je ne la vois pas dans la liste.
D'accord. En tout cas, j'espère qu'elle va l'envoyer à tout le monde parce que je pense que ça peut servir à nous tous. En tout cas, pour ce sujet pour lequel on parle aujourd'hui.
Thank you. So I can close? Hello?
Yes, please, sorry. Yes.
Sadly, yes.
Okay, thank you, everybody. It's been great, and it's an ongoing process.
Yes.
So I want to end it here. Oh, let me tell you, look, Caroline, I'm going to tell them a short story. So I was with the, I guess she would be my grandaunt, yes, Effa Sutherland, the late Ghanaian dramatist, when a relative brought her newborn to her. It was that relative's first child. And Antefua was so overjoyed that this her relative had a child, and she was holding the child, and she was so happy. And then she said to my cousin, you know, you've done a wonderful thing, and God has blessed you, and this is great. But you have gone and incited a war. And so welcome to parenting. It's a good thing, but it is a war. And I've never forgotten it though. Every time something happens, I'm like, yeah, that's the war right there. So yeah, so we continue.
Yes.
Struggle on, my people, struggle on. I love everybody. I want to thank Adventures Live, Nana Dako and her team, for everybody for bringing this online. You know, this has been wonderful. We have continued the community online and have not let this plague that is COVID stop us from having moments that bring us all closer together and are comforting. So thank you very much. Thank you very much. And for all the African parents out there, please do better. Thank you. Bye. Yep.
Thank you so much. And thank you to our interpreters, Faye and Brenda.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Good evening.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Are we leaving? Should we leave?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm going to end the meeting now.
Okay.